I thought buying my dream lake cabin would be the happiest day of my life, a place to escape, unwind, and finally call my own. But the moment I set foot on the property, I realized the real battle had just begun. The HOA had other plans. They claimed the land, the cabin, everything I had worked for, and they weren't backing down. Threatening letters piled up, deadlines were impossible, and suddenly, my dream felt more like a nightmare. Could a simple cabin purchase turn into a fight for my legal rights, my sanity, and my home? What I did next would shock everyone, and it wasn't what they expected. Before the chaos began, life felt simple, almost idyllic. I had spent years dreaming of owning a lake cabin, a quiet sanctuary tucked between towering pines and the gentle ripple of the water, a place where mornings smelled of fresh pine and evenings glowed with golden sunsets reflecting off the lake. Weekends were meant for canoe rides, fishing, and reading on the deck, far away from the noise and stress of everyday life. When I finally closed on the property, I felt a surge of accomplishment and peace, believing this slice of heaven was mine and mine alone. The surrounding community was quiet, friendly, and seemingly straightforward. Neighbors waved as they passed, children played near the water's edge, and the lake offered an escape from the world. I had imagined nothing but freedom and serenity here. But beneath the calm surface, tension simmered. Rumors whispered about the HOA's strict rules, about residents who had clashed with them before, about fines and mysterious demands that could appear without warning. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just idle gossip, not something that could touch me. Little did I know, that very HOA had been watching my purchase from the shadows, ready to assert control over what they insisted wasn't fully mine. That quiet, dreamlike cabin on the lake was about to become the epicenter of a battle I hadn't even imagined, where every right I thought I had could be questioned, challenged, and threatened, and where I would have to fight not just for a property, but for my peace of mind, my freedom, and my very sense of home. As soon as I settled into my dream lake cabin, the HOA began their relentless interference, sending letters that were more like threats than notifications, each one more absurd than the last. First, it was a complaint about the angle of my dock, then the color of my mailbox, then accusations that my landscaping didn't meet their vague, ever-changing community standards. Every day brought a new email, a new warning, a new fine that arrived like clockwork, and each one chipped away at the excitement I had felt just days before. I tried to comply, thinking that maybe if I adjusted a few things, the harassment would stop, but the rules were impossible to satisfy, arbitrary at best, punitive at worst, and the HOA seemed to take perverse pleasure in escalating every minor detail into a full-blown violation. The local neighbors whispered that I was lucky to even still have my cabin, that the HOA had a history of strong-arming residents, of using intimidation to make them give up or sell, and suddenly the idyllic lakefront felt more like a battlefield than a sanctuary. The fines grew larger, letters became more accusatory, and one morning, I arrived to find a notice taped to my front door ordering me to remove a small storage shed I had legally built, with only 48 hours to comply or face legal action. I photographed every document, saved every email, and tried to reason with the board, only to be met with silence or dismissive replies that suggested my concerns were irrelevant. Then came the inspection, unannounced and aggressive, where representatives from the HOA prowled the property, measuring, photographing, scrutinizing every detail, treating my cabin as if it belonged to them rather than me. I began to feel trapped, frustrated, powerless, like a character in a story, where the villain controlled the rules, the timeline, and even the perception of right and wrong. And each confrontation drained me emotionally, while fueling a growing determination not to be bullied. I spent hours researching laws, HOA regulations, and precedent cases, discovering that some of the fines were legally questionable, that some of the threats held no authority, and that my rights as a property owner were far stronger than the HOA wanted me to believe. The tension reached a breaking point when I received a notice demanding immediate removal of a small dock extension I had added months before, even though it was fully permitted by county regulations, a demand made purely at the whim of the HOA's arbitrary interpretation of their own rules. That night, sitting by the lake as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I realized that this was no longer about compliance. It was about standing my ground, proving that they could not bully me out of a home I had legally purchased, and the fight was about to escalate far beyond letters, fines, and inspections. I began documenting everything meticulously, capturing video of every interaction, saving every notice, preparing for a confrontation that I knew would come soon. And as I slept that night with the gentle lapping of water against the shore outside, I felt a mix of fear and resolve, because I understood that the next move would not only determine the fate of my cabin, but also reveal whether this neighborhood would be a place where residents could stand up for themselves, or one where the HOA's unchecked authority would continue to grow. And as morning came, a new envelope lay on my porch with words that made my stomach drop, hinting at a legal maneuver so audacious it could force me out entirely if I wasn't prepared. And in that moment I knew the real battle had only just begun. The day of reckoning arrived faster than I expected, and it hit like a storm I had been bracing for, but could never truly anticipate. The HOA showed up at my cabin, letters in hand, faces stiff with authority, ready to enforce what they claimed were my violations. But what I had come to recognize as nothing more than a personal vendetta against anyone who dared own property without bending to their arbitrary will. My heart pounded as I watched them stride across the dock, cameras and clipboards in hand. But I was prepared. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, documenting every fine, every unreasonable demand, every unpermitted inspection. As they approached the deck, I calmly presented my files, pointing out county permits, legal precedents, and even photographic proof showing that every improvement I had made was fully compliant. Their expressions flickered between annoyance, disbelief, and growing unease, but they attempted to assert control anyway, issuing another threat to escalate to legal action, claiming I could face removal or heavy fines. And for a moment, I could feel the weight of their power pressing in, the fear of losing my dream cabin almost tangible. Then came the moment that changed everything. I revealed the evidence that exposed their pattern of harassment. Letters contradicting themselves, inspections conducted outside their legal authority, and the fact that several board members had conflicts of interest, profiting from property sales they tried to manipulate. The room went silent, the confident posture of the HOA enforcers faltering as they realized I wasn't just compliant. I was armed with the law itself, and this time, it was on my side. I could see the panic in their eyes as I calmly, almost coldly, detailed the penalties they could face for overstepping their authority, from fines and legal fees to potential criminal liability for fraud and intimidation, and the power dynamic shifted instantly, the once imposing figures now scrambling, whispering among themselves, unable to counter a homeowner who had turned their own rules against them. The tension escalated as one particularly belligerent board member attempted to argue, to belittle me, to reassert control. But I interrupted with citations from state HOA statutes, past court rulings, and evidence from their own emails that left no room for rebuttal. The anger in the room was palpable, the frustration boiling over, and in that electric moment, I felt a mix of vindication, triumph, and disbelief at how far this had escalated, from a peaceful dream cabin to a battlefield of bureaucracy, ego, and petty power. The confrontation reached its apex when the HOA president, face reddened with humiliation, tried one final intimidation tactic, threatening to report me to authorities for violations they had just been proven to fabricate. And that's when I dropped the final bombshell. A letter from the county, officially siding with me, confirming my ownership, my compliance, and exposing the HOA's overreach, leaving them frozen, mouths agape, as I calmly informed them that any further attempts to intimidate or harass would result in legal action, civil penalties, and full public disclosure. In that moment, the air seemed to crackle with the weight of justice, finally tipping the scales. The officers and board members retreated, muttering excuses, humiliation plain in their eyes, and I finally felt the deep, satisfying rush of victory mixed with relief, knowing I had protected not just my home, but my rights, my dignity, and the principle that no overbearing organization could bully a homeowner who knew the law and refused to yield. And yet, even as the cabin settled back into quiet, the lake's gentle waves lapping at the shore, I couldn't shake the thought that this was just one battle won in a larger war over property, authority, and justice, leaving me to wonder what challenges might come next, and whether anyone else in the neighborhood would be willing to stand up as I had, or simply bow to the oppressive rules of those who thought they could control everything without consequence. After the dust settled, and the HOA had retreated, humiliated and stripped of the veneer of authority they had tried to wield over me, a profound sense of relief and vindication washed over me. Yet I quickly realized that the victory was more than just personal. It had ripples that extended through the entire neighborhood, reshaping how residents viewed the HOA, how power could be challenged, and what it meant to truly own property without fear of arbitrary domination. In the weeks that followed, I methodically filed formal complaints and legal notices, ensuring that the board members who had attempted to bully me faced scrutiny from county authorities and ethics committees, and I watched as their credibility eroded, lawsuits quietly mounting, reputations tarnished in a way that could not be repaired by empty apologies or forced compliance from fearful neighbors. My cabin, once a symbol of quiet escape and serene lakeside life, had transformed into a fortress of rights, and a testament to the principle that knowledge, preparation, and persistence could outmatch intimidation and abuse, and neighbors who had previously whispered in private about their own grievances now approached me with stories of harassment, fines, and threats, seeking advice, and slowly, a community of residents who had felt powerless began to realize that they could challenge authority too, that standing firm and documenting every interaction could level the playing field. Beyond the neighborhood, the experience forced me to reflect on the fragility of ownership and the importance of vigilance. The same HOA that tried to seize control of my property could easily target anyone else who didn't have the time, resources, or knowledge to defend themselves, and that awareness drove me to organize informational meetings, create guides on HOA rights, and speak openly about my experience in local forums, not out of revenge, but to empower others to protect their homes before the threats became insurmountable. Financially, I recovered every cent of fines and legal fees that had been wrongfully levied, and through careful negotiation and legal leverage, even secured compensation for the emotional and logistical toll they had forced upon me, demonstrating that accountability could extend beyond humiliation into tangible restitution. A reminder to anyone who thought they could act above the law. Personally, I found a new sense of confidence and clarity. The fear and frustration that had once gripped me during their escalating attacks transformed into resilience and a deeper understanding of how to navigate conflicts, not just with HOAs, but in any situation where power is misused and rules are manipulated for personal gain. Socially, the neighborhood shifted. What had been a community subtly controlled by an overbearing board became a place where voices mattered, where residents felt emboldened to speak up, and where transparency slowly replaced secrecy. And I realized that my fight had ignited a broader cultural change, a ripple effect where the fear of retaliation lost its power against the knowledge of one's rights. Emotionally, the experience left scars: the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the dread of receiving yet another letter or inspection. But those were outweighed by the exhilaration of turning a dire situation into a story of triumph, of watching bullies crumble under the weight of their own overreach, and of knowing that I had taken action not only for myself, but for everyone who might follow in my footsteps. As months passed, I restored the cabin to its full, peaceful potential, finally sitting by the water without the tension of looming threats, reflecting on how fragile dreams can feel when confronted by unchecked authority, and yet how potent they become when defended with preparation, courage, and persistence. And as I watched the sun set over the lake, its reflection rippling across the water like a promise of justice, I understood that the story of my cabin was no longer just about a house. It was about standing up to intimidation, reclaiming control over one's life, and proving that knowledge, patience, and unwavering resolve could transform even the most oppressive situation into a narrative of empowerment, leaving me to wonder how many others would be inspired to fight for their rights, to protect what is legally and morally theirs, and whether the courage to stand firm might finally tip the balance of power in communities long dominated by fear. Because if a single cabin at the edge of a lake could spark such a chain reaction, what else might be possible when ordinary homeowners refused to bow to the whims of the overreaching few?